Okay, so we are going to factor quadratic equations, so ax squared plus bx plus c, and specifically today when a equals 1. Okay. Now, here are some things that you are going to be able to notice. They're quadratics, which means the highest exponent is going to be a 2. If it's any higher than 2, you probably have to pull out a GCF. Okay? So if your exponent is higher than 2, you're going to have to pull out a GCF. But on Friday, I started to give you a list of factoring. What was the very first thing I told you we needed to look for when we factored? GCF. Always look for GCF. Make your life easier if you can. Okay, that is still the case. The second thing we're going to do if GCF doesn't work is we're going to look for what I'm going to call the super X. And I'm going to explain that to you in 2 seconds. So GCF first and then the super X. Okay. Now before we talk about the super X, what form is x plus 2 times x plus 3 in? What form is that? What did I call that? What form? What form is x squared plus 5x plus 6 in? What? Standard form. This is standard form. What's the top one? What form is that? No one? If you have sets of parentheses, you are in factored form. So if you pull out a GCF, in this case, we're going to start looking at the super X. It's all factored form. So you need to know factored form versus standard form and when you're finding which one. So if I'm in factored form and I tell you to write to standard form, what do? So if I want you to go from this to this, how do you do that? Distribute or box. Okay, so factored form to standard form is distribute or box. If you go from standard form to factored form, you are factoring. Okay, we're either using GCF, super X, and we'll learn something else in a couple days. Okay, that's going to be important. So let's break down what our super X is going to look like. So I would like you to draw a decent size X. And then what makes it super is it goes across, there's a line that goes across the middle like a belt on a superhero. And of course I use blue so it blends into my line. That's better. Okay, so here's my super X. Now I'm just going to give you general for right now. So to fill out the super X, in this top portion here, we're going to have A times C. And we're going to identify our A, B, and C. But on the top, it's going to be A times C. On the bottom, it's going to be our B term. Okay. This top part of the super X is going to be A and then whatever your variable is. Like this is stuff you get to fill in without thinking too hard. And then these ones are going to be factors. And again, we'll go through all of this slowly. But that's the general form. So that X that we've been doing, we found 2 factors that multiplied to the top and added to the bottom. It's the same thing. Okay, so that X you just did in the warm-up is exactly the same, and I'll show you why we add this part up here. Okay. All right. So let's just get into it and see what we have. So let's look at x squared plus 11x plus 30. Now you should remember from, oh gosh, trying to think of what formula you used when you would identify A, B, and C before. But we need to identify the A, the B, and the C so that we can fill out our super X. And if you look back up at the title of my notes, it's AX squared plus BX plus C. So what is my A going to be? And it's just numbers. You don't have to worry about the variable. What's the number for A? 1. What's the number for B? 11. And C? 30. Okay, so that's step 1, identifying the A, B, and C. Everyone okay with how I got A, B, and C? And remember, A, B, and C are just integers. There are no variables involved there. Okay, so let's draw our super X because we're going to factor. So what goes in the top part? A times C. So 1 times 30 is 30. We're filling in what we know without doing any real math at this point. What goes in the bottom? B, which is 11. Okay. Up top here is your A term plus your variable. Your A term plus your variable. So I've done nothing except fill in my X so far. So far, so good? Okay. So to find the factors, we are looking for two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11. What are two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 11? 5 and 6? So let's check. 5 times 6 is 30. 5 plus 6 is 11. You good? Okay, so without this part, that's the X that you've been working on over the last couple days, which you seem to understand, right? Here's why this is important. We get to take this now and write it directly into factored form. So our factored form is going to be X plus 5 and X plus 6. So X plus 5 and X plus 6. You take what's here and write it in the sets of the parentheses. That's your factors. Can you check your work for this problem, you think? Yeah. How? You could distribute or box, right? For fun, let's just check it on this one. We won't do it for all of them, but let's just check. So if I distribute, I get X squared plus 6x, and then 5x plus 30. When I multiply it out, is it the exact same thing that I started with? Yeah. Then I know my factors are good. There is absolutely no reason you should ever get one of these questions wrong because you can check it every single time. Now, you're going to choose not to because it's extra work. But especially if you're not sure on a problem, multiply it through. Most of you did really, really well on that test. I know you can multiply. Okay? All right, let's try a second one. And again, the first thing I want to do is identify A, B, and C. So x squared minus 13x minus 30. What is A? 1. B? Negative 13. That's important. And C? Negative 30. Okay, so 1, negative 13, and negative 30. What goes on the top of my super X? A times C. So 1 times negative 30 is negative 30. What goes on the bottom? B, which is negative 13. And on the top part of this, it's your A plus your variable. So someone tell me in words what I'm trying to find here. Don't tell me what the answer is, but what am I trying to find, Connor?
Numbers that multiply to 30 and add into negative.
Okay, so two numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to negative 13.
10 and 3.
10 and 3. Okay, so let's look at 10 and 3. 10 times 3 is positive 30. Okay, so which one? Negative 3, okay. So 10 times negative 3 is negative 30. 10 minus 3 is 7. Maybe it's not 10 and 3, because if I make this negative, that gives me a negative 7. So hopefully you wrote in pencil.
Oh, I didn't.
So what else multiplies to 30? Okay, is there any way to add 6 and 5 together to get 10?
Ooh. 2 and 15.
2 and 15 maybe.
Yeah. That's
Negative 15.
Okay, which one should be negative? 15. So let's check. Negative 15 times 2 is negative 30. Negative 15 plus 2 is negative 13. Okay? Final step is to write in factored form. So x minus 15. Can I write 1x minus 15? Yeah, it's the same thing. X minus 15 times x plus 2. Are we okay with that? Yeah? All right. I'm going to give you one to try. So x squared minus 8x plus 12. So identify your A, B, and C. Fill in your super X. And see if you can find the factors. Okay. So first of all, A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is negative 8, C is 12. That's the first thing. On top, A times C is 12, B is negative 8, and then I have a 1x and a 1x. So two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to negative 8. Give me two numbers that multiply to 12. 6 and 2, okay? So 6 and 2. 6 times 2 is 12, but 6 plus 2 is positive 8. Can I make that a negative 8? What if both of them are negative? Negative 6 times negative 2 is positive 12. Negative 6 minus 2 is negative 8. Okay, so some of the times you're going to have to try. How many people started with 3 and 4? Couple people. Okay, 3 times 4 is 12, but is 3 plus 4 7 or 8? There's no way to make it 8, right? It's a 7. Sometimes you'll have to use 12 and 1. Okay, you'll have to think of all the factors that multiply. Final answer then is x minus 6 times x minus 2. Okay, let's try another one. X squared minus 2x minus 15. Try that one. So let's identify A, B, and C first. What's A? 1. B.
negative 2.
Negative 2. C. Negative 15. Okay, the reason I'm making you do this now is because tomorrow our A won't be 1. And we'll have to actually multiply something other than 1 to our C. Okay? So, on top, 1 times negative 15 is negative 15. Bottom is negative 2. And then I have a 1x and a 1x. So someone raise your hand and tell me 2 numbers that multiply to negative 15 and add to negative 2. Elias? Negative 5 and 3. Let's check. Negative 5 times 3 is negative 15. Negative 5 plus 3 is negative 2. So final answer is x minus 5 times x plus 3. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so let's look at this problem. And before you jump right in, we're going to talk about it. So 2x squared plus 36 plus 108. So before we just jump right in, is there anything that you notice that might be helpful to us? There's what? Okay, it's a 2x squared, and I told you right now all of our a's should be 1, right? But if you go back up to our list at the very top that says factoring, what's the very first thing we should look for? GCF. Is there a GCF that for 2x squared plus 30x plus 108? Is there something I can pull out? A 2. Okay, so I need to pull out the 2 first. So if I pull out the 2, I'm left with x squared plus 15x plus 54. Which means now what you're putting into your super x, the numbers are a whole lot smaller. So I'm going to set up my super x now with my a, my b, and my c. What's my a? 1. What's my b? 15. And my c? 54. Okay, so 1 times 54 is 54. My b is 15. And then it's a and my variable. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 54 and add to 15. Okay, Connor, 1 second. Let me give everyone a chance to think. But you can tell me. 2 numbers that multiply to 54 and add to 15. Everyone think they have it? Connor, what'd you get? 9 and 6. 9 times 6 is 54. 9 plus 6 is 15. Okay. Now, when I write this out, I have x plus 9 and x plus 6. You think there's anything else I need to add to that? A 2. Because I pulled the 2 out to begin with, so that 2 has to stay out front. Okay, that's super important. So if you pull out a GCF, it has to attach to your final answer at the end. Okay. I'm going to give you one of these to try, and then we will be done. So if you can squeeze it somewhere, squeeze it. Or put it on the notes page if you, or the warm-up page if you have to. Okay, last problem. Okay, so see if there's a GCF. If there is, pull it out and then do your super X. When you're done, check with your group and see if they got the same thing. If your final equation, once you pull out your GCF, isn't like an x squared x and then a constant term right now, you did something wrong GCF-wise. Okay, your highest exponent should be an x squared. X squared. X squared. So first things first, what can I pull out? What's my GCF? 3. Okay, if I pull out a 3, I'm left with x squared minus 13x plus 12. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2 is identify your A, B, and C. What's A? 1. B, negative 13. C, 12. So on top, A times C, 1 times 12 is 12. On the bottom is negative 13. And then it's A plus my variable and A plus my variable. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 12 and add to negative 13. So 12 and 1, and both of them are going to be negative. Negative 12 times negative 1 is positive 12. Negative 12 plus negative 1 is a negative 13. So if the factors that you're using don't work, because my guess for 12 you started with 3 and 4 and 2 and 6, right? But don't ever forget 1 times that number as well. So I have x minus 12 and then x minus 1. What if I wrote x minus 1 and x minus 12? That would be fine, right? It could be flipped, that's okay. The last thing I need to do is bring down that 3 that I pulled out at the very beginning.